What's good, people? Well, after much pomp and circumstance, disgraced, disbarred attorney, human cockroach Alex Murdaugh finally had his day in court, in which he requested a new trial based on allegations of jury tampering by disgraced Clerk of Court Becky Hill. So, in the end, not only did his lawyers not get the three-ring media circus I'm sure they were hoping for, but after a short one-day hearing, the judge summarily denied Murdaugh's request for a new trial, putting him back at square one. So, how'd the testimony play out? Was it the right decision? Let's do a legal deep dive in the Alex Murdaugh motion for a new trial on the grounds of jury tampering. Let's go back and review the motion the defense originally filed. And I have to admit, when I first read the motion, the allegations were quite concerning. Basically, they alleged that the Clerk of Court, Becky Hill, was number one, having private communications with the jurors about the case, and number two, in her capacity as Clerk of Court, engaging in conduct calculated to increase the chance of a guilty verdict so she could get a better book deal. Let's talk about the legal standard that applies in this situation. Now, we've heard the phrase jury tampering being thrown around a lot, but jury tampering is not a legal term. Nowhere in the legal definition for the standard that applies in this case are the words jury tampering. The standard requires two things. Number one, there was an improper communication with the jurors. Number two, the communication probably affected the outcome of the trial. That is a standard that applies in this case. Now let's talk about the testimony in the hearing. While all 12 jurors were questioned, there were two key witnesses in this hearing. Number one, disgraced Clerk of Court Becky Hill, and number two, the mysterious Juror Z. Now let's talk about the Clerk of Court Becky Hill. I mean, let's face it, she is the face of greed and misconduct in office, for which, by the way, she is currently under criminal investigation by the State Attorney General's office. Becky Hill has zero credibility. It starts with her using her government email to try to negotiate a book deal for the trial that she is managing. And in her capacity as Clerk of Court, while she is managing the day-to-day operation of this trial, she's trying to cut a book deal and obtains a $100,000 advance using that inside information. Once she gets the money, she admits that she plagiarized the beginning of the book. Now, why would she do all this? Well, according to the testimony of a co-worker, she wanted a lake house. So, going into the hearing, I think we can all agree Becky Hill has zero credibility. So, she shows up to testify with not just one, but two criminal defense lawyers. Two, okay? So, that gives you some perspective of what's going on in her world. Now, honestly, I didn't expect her to testify that she did anything improper or tampered with the jury. But the thing I thought was odd was that, there are routine things that a Clerk of Court talks to a jury about. How long is it going to take? Smoke breaks. What time do we go to lunch? What time are we going to end so I can make childcare arrangements? But when Becky Hill testified, according to her testimony, she didn't say anything to any juror. And that just defies logic. I mean, it makes no sense for her to say that. That tells me she is so afraid of criminal prosecution and her conduct that she's going to get up there and just deny making any statements whatsoever, which again, that defies all logic based on her position. So all of the jurors are questioned, all 12. And I do think it was a good idea for the judge to handle the question of the jurors herself, as opposed to letting Murdaugh's lawyers question the jurors. I think it would have turned into a circus. And her questions were limited in scope. Number one, did the Clerk of Court make any comments to them about the case? Or number two, did it affect their decision? I mean, those were the relevant questions, and I think she handled that very well. Now, of all the jurors, 10 of the 12 said they heard no comments by the clerk whatsoever. In addition to the mysterious Juror Z, one juror did say they heard the clerk make a comment about Murdaugh, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, what we're all going to find interesting was when Juror Z was questioned, She did in fact indicate that she heard the clerk of court, Becky Hill, make comments about the case, and more importantly, that the comments she made affected her decision and was a factor in her decision to vote for a guilty verdict in this case. And I have to admit, Juror Z's testimony was both factually and legally compelling. She stated unequivocally she heard the clerk of court, Becky Hill, state, number one, watch him closely, and number two, watch his actions, or something to that effect. That's compelling because the clerk of court is clearly commenting about the defendant in this huge double murder trial. And I'm not certain, it's not clear whether or not the clerk made the comments directly to the jurors or said it in passing. Either way, I don't really think it matters. She's the clerk of court. She's a court official. She's managing the day-to-day operations of the courthouse. She's not some random employee of the courthouse. So the fact that she's making those comments is, in my mind, significant, and they should be given significant weight in the judge's decision. But at this point, I gotta call it like I see it. Once Juror Z testified and answered the million-dollar question that the clerk of court's comments did in fact influence her decision to vote guilty and convict Alex Murdaugh, at that point, it's game over. However, the judge, based on some rationale, decided that that testimony wasn't sufficient and wasn't enough. In fact, I think in her ruling, she used language to the effect of the Supreme Court wouldn't want a lengthy trial overturned based on foolish comments by the clerk of court. I don't see that. I don't understand that analysis. I mean, those words, that analysis does not fit anywhere in the legal definition for the standard that applies in this case. She also made a comment, the judge did, indicating that the evidence of his guilt was overwhelming. And honestly, I'm not seeing that at all either. We all agree Alex Murdaugh's a cockroach, he's a thief, he's a liar, and I'm not saying there wasn't sufficient evidence for him to be convicted, but the evidence of the murder was hardly overwhelming. I mean, there was no strong physical evidence. Of course, there was no eyewitness. I mean, I do believe that a big part of the evidence was the fact that he was such a despicable human being and a liar. I think the strongest evidence they had was his voice on the TikTok video that put him at the scene after he denied being there. But despite that, I mean, it was a very, very defendable case. So for the court to say that the evidence was overwhelming and that being a factor in her decision, I'm not buying that at all. And what's important to keep in mind in a criminal case, it doesn't matter that 11 of the 12 jurors says it didn't affect their decision. The fact that one did makes all the difference in the world. In order to convict, you must have all 12 jurors, not just 11. So if 11 agree to vote guilty and one is not sure or one decides not guilty, then guess what? You don't have a conviction and you got to start all over again. So that's the significance of this one juror taking that position. Now, in the end, I believe this case will be reversed on appeal, and this is yet one of the many issues I think will get it reversed, and I think we're going to be back in court for a new trial sooner rather than later. Well, that's all I got. Please let me know what you think about the result, about the testimony, and until next time, that's it. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. There are so many topics to talk about. I appreciate you taking the time to join me on this legal deep dive, but please subscribe, leave me your comments, and tell me the legal issues you want to talk about. You can find me on YouTube, social media, and your favorite podcast platform. Until then, that's it.